Welcome to the first Minetest podcast episode. We're still working on a name. Right now we're going with Nodecast. I'm EXE Virus, your current host, and today we're interviewing Mr. Benrob, 0329. You'll have to tell me about where does the 0329 come from?
Well, as not very many people know, it's actually my birthday, March 29th.
What is your professional work or educational background?
Not too much. Most of what I do is self-taught. Pretty much everything I've done around the Minetest community is just stuff I've picked up for hobbies.
Okay.
I haven't gone to college or anything like that. It's just things I've done and found interesting, continue to improve over time.
So what led you to Minetest? It's what kind of games do you enjoy then?
Nowadays, I tend to enjoy sort of semi-story-driven to fully story-driven kind of open worlds.
Okay, so Zelda is your favorite then?
I've never actually played Legend of Zelda.
Give it a try sometime. The older stuff's good.
Yeah, it's what I'm told.
Okay. So when you say story-driven.
I very much enjoy Valve's lineup of titles. I very much enjoy games like Subnautica or even Minecraft, which would have been blasphemous to younger me because I became very religious about a lot of open source stuff for a little while. But it's all the tool at the end of the day, so.
Okay. So is that the time frame that you learned about Minetest, or when did you stumble across it?
I stumbled across Minetest way early on, initially because it was a game actually in the Linux Mint repositories when I was first trying out Linux. I didn't like Minetest or Linux at the time because I think I broke my Linux Mint install. I believe that was the one where I uninstalled Python because I was like, I don't need that. Why would I need Python? Oh, the system uses Python. Well then.
Nice. How did you install it? Did you install it via a jump drive or a CD?
I think a CD back then.
Okay.
This would have been back in 2012, 2013.
Okay. Good era.
Yeah. And then I found Minetest. It was a really outdated version, I believe, at that point. Still probably in the 0.3 era. Rats were an item in the game, but there were no rats to be seen. So, just very confused. Didn't really understand, but I wound up getting back into it actually because a friend reintroduced me to Linux through Ubuntu 14.04 when that first came out, and eventually Minetest. So some friends and I set up sort of a private server, and we ran different mods. Back then, everything was slower than it even is now, if people can imagine that.
Slower how?
Oh, the Messicons mod back then was just atrocious. It was a feat of programming at that point, but it was not very well made at the same time. Just everything was slow. If you play on any servers that use a really old version of Messicons, you can maybe see what I mean. Just nothing runs quick. Everything is slowed way down compared to how you might think it should run. Okay.
So I take it that you went down the path of more technical mods rather than story-driven mods, that sort of thing. Are there any story-driven mods that you've come across yet?
Not so much.
All right, we'll have to work on that.
I think that maybe the closest thing you could consider is Mineclone.
Sure.
Just because Minecraft has sort of its own story. It's not quite a story in the traditional sense, but it does have some progression there that has story-like elements, but that's more a side effect of its nature. I haven't seen any specifically story-driven mods, but I have seen mods that look like they're trying to lead up to being story-driven, sort of NPC systems and things over the years that people have made, but never really followed up on usually.
Sure. It's normally a lot of work to stand something up like that, and most of the people that are excited to embark on that journey, myself included, are not talented enough at the time they start that journey. Process and learning.
Unfortunately, talent is something you gain over time.
Yeah, which I guess that's not talent then. It's just practice.
Yes.
Skill.
Most things fall under that.
Yeah. So, some quick questions about Minetest itself with your opinions. What is some of the current things that really kind of grind your gears about Minetest?
I don't know that there's too much that grinds my gears per se. The things I've done, mainly working on the Infinite IKEA game,
Okay.
which I will return to at some point, despite what people think, has mostly stayed within the engine's limitations. Trying to make use of things that the engine excels at rather than things that it really struggles with is sort of the way I think about writing mods. But something that grinds my gears. What's my biggest problem with Minetest?
So if it was for me, myself, I've been debating on this question for a long time. It would have to be the fact that we're still based on IRR lict. It's just an old code base. And sure, there's like new branches of it that are fully like Vulkan, support OpenGL4 or whatever, but we can't move on to that because we still have to support our OpenGL2 code player base. There's other engines out there. There's other backends. At this point, Minetest is an engine, so we just need a connection point to your like inputs, audio, and video. But we'll get there. That would be my biggest gripe, is that engine is old as dirt.
Well, you're not wrong. That's something I've seen people debating about since I joined the community even. People have really taken issue with Minetest's use of Eierlichit? I'm not German. I can't pronounce it either. A lot of what I see, though, is often our use of that engine. Minetest it doesn't have a good shader pipeline. It doesn't have really... Our bottlenecks are not often that underlying engine from what I've seen, but at the same time, I do understand it being an older code base and being harder to work with.
Yeah, I would say where that crops up in my experience, is animated meshes. So any animated models are all CPU, 100% CPU calculated. So for all those listening, every vertex on an animated mesh is done by your CPU. In current Minetest and IRLic, they have a little if statement that says, if there's GPU rendering, don't use it. Use CPU rendering instead. But that's the biggest one. The other one is like old file formats. It doesn't have support for anything that Blender exports natively except for OBJ, right? In order to get an animated model into Minetest, we have to use this old B3D files from, I forget which game engine that was originally from.
Blitz 3D, actually. From the folks over at Blitz Basic. If anyone has used that, you are old. Congratulations.
Yeah, so Blitz 3D files they're okay. They're somewhat compressed, but the problem is that you can't edit them, right? Once you export it, we don't have an importer into Blender in this community. So you can't take a B3D that you find in the wild and make changes easily to it.
Yeah. The best way, as a workaround for this, as I have had to work around this, you can use a Simps tools to convert it to a more modern file format or just directly to a blend. But I believe you lose all the animations if you do that.
Exactly.
So you can get the model, just not the animation work, which is sometimes half of what you want.
Exactly. But it's okay. Minetest doesn't exactly have the best animations yet. Probably because we don't have those kinds of asset developers yet. I would never say a blocky game attracts really crazy high-definition animators.
Not generally. Although it could, but...
I would enjoy that. I'd like to see the juxtaposition.
We'll get there.
Okay, no grind your gears, you love Minetest as is, nothing to complain about. Got it.
I don't know that I have nothing to complain about, but most of what I have are specific issues.
Sure.
Specific things I see people complain about, specific things I see people want. I think a lot more of my issues come from maybe certain tendencies that the community tends to have, actually.
Okay.
A lot of the community tends to very much hate Minecraft, despite the fact that it serves as a lot of our inspiration. And despite the fact that it is, whether or not you agree with some of the more recent changes, it is a well-made game. And it does serve as sort of a grounding point that a lot of people come to Minetest from, whether you were looking for free Minecraft back in the day, or whether you're just looking for something you can actually hack on.
Yeah. And I will say that Minecraft is moving away from modding, has been for many years, for those of you that don't know. But only because of the Bedrock Edition and all their unifications that they're trying to get across platforms. Basically, Java's too insecure for them. But that said, it is a great game. I have to agree. I even liked it back before they had, I think, called The End. When they first invented the Nether, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as for Minetest itself, where do you kind of hope that, I guess, as the engine goes, or even just the community goes, what kind of directions do you hope that we move towards?
I would say the direction I feel that Minetest should go is probably continuing largely down the path it is going, sort of more towards being an engine and a content distribution platform. If you had maybe asked me a few years ago what I thought, I might have said that, it shouldn't try to be a content distribution platform, but I think that considering the nature of our community, it does work fairly well. I know that more recently some of that discussion has come back up as to whether or not games should aim to be sort of their own front end. But I think that it might be better in the long run if we more aim to continue towards the sort of hybrid game and engine that we've had and has worked fairly well and has worked for other projects, such as Gary's Mod.
Sure. Okay, I see where you're thinking. Now, have you had experience as a modder, tinker, developer in other communities that have a similar hybrid?
I've been players in similar communities, such as Gary's Mod, but I've never actually cracked open any modding for any other game, I don't think, other than, kind of...
So, what made you crack it open for Minetest?
Largely just the fact that I had been a community member for so long. This is really the community that I think I have sort of the deepest roots in, so making content for it seemed logical, I suppose.
Very cool. Okay, so you just want to give back at almost charity. Now, when you're working with, I guess, Minetest or mod development or even like for your server setup, what kind of tools have you used that you think other people should be using?
As far as tooling goes, the funny thing about Minetest is it doesn't need too much as for tooling. I mean, you have the obvious ones, Git and, insert your favorite code editor here. I know VS Code is very popular, especially with Green Zenith's plugins for it. But I've used about every code editor at this point, from Vim to Emacs to VS Code and Genie, and I don't really... It doesn't matter to me as much what code editor I use, just whichever one is most convenient for a project generally. I'll switch between them every once in a while. One tool I think that would be useful is if we could get kind of a standard code formatting config. Because there is sort of a standard Minetest code style, one that at least the engine and MTG used to use when it was actively developed. Sort of having some kind of a standard so that we can better interrupt, or at least each project having an actual Lua formatter. And there is one that I use for IKEA that could potentially be linked. I don't see much automation of that sort of thing as much in the broader community.
Yeah, we haven't formalized too much. I know in the past I had a pending PR put in for Lua. It was for giving games their own ability to have a theme in the main menu. That PR, when I submitted it, it spit back a bunch of complaints about how my Lua was formatted. I think they have a Lua formatter file in there. I just don't have the right tooling to auto-lint my code yet. So I do believe they have one. I have not successfully or seen good documentation on how to use that. Maybe we need a better dev wiki. Hot.
When it's up.
Yeah, when it's up, exactly.
As far as dev wikis go, honestly, GitHub's wiki system would probably work very well for that. It would be centralized in the code repository, and it would be close at hand, I suppose.
Yeah, we thought about, we being a few of the community members, there's a discussion on, I think, IRC once, about possibly standing up something like read the docs style websites where you have a markdown auto-generated into a static code site, which is a little bit fancier than GitHub's wikis. Basically, both work. The other one lets us host it elsewhere if we needed to leave GitHub. I don't foresee that happening, but it's a way to be more agnostic to the platform, should GitHub ever go down. Now, that said, it's pretty easy to take those markdown files that GitHub Wiki runs on and toss them into a static code site generator. So the problem is moot at that point. But that was the discussions. Essentially, everyone said, well, I don't got time.
Time is the enemy of us all.
It is. It also is expectations. We expect, blazing progress every day. I have one last question before we get kind of into the theme of this podcast. What is your favorite mod? And don't say your own game.
Oh, man. My favorite mod as of right now is probably Nodecore.
Okay.
I have not made progress into the later game aspects of it yet, but I have enjoyed what I have played. It is definitely the most original game I have seen for Minetest. Albeit, I will agree, it is confusing at the start, but once you start to get the hang of how, it tends to make mechanics, it does start to click a little bit more.
War would be glad to hear that. I'll be sure he'll give you a shout out sometime. You just got +1 on his status list. So, on to the podcast subject. So, you had said that you had experience with making videos around Minetest, content, servers, audio. I assume that you've done some audio work as well. I kind of wanted to pick your brain. What are some of the things that you've learned about the Minetest community about how to make content for it?
People like Let's Play series. And that's just kind of a universal thing. People like sort of engaging long-term series in many aspects. That's certainly not the only kind of content you can make. I think that the numerous amount of mod reviews will show that there's very much a market for that as well. But what I found is that people want more longer-term series, which is one of the reasons why I had started the AIMS series a while back, sort of to try to give something kind of an analog to Hermitcraft for Minecraft.
Now, speak to your series. I am not familiar with it.
It was an attempt at making a symmetric multiplayer Let's Play series for Minetest. So I tried to sort of get together a few different community members who were known for making videos. Minetest videos / Nathan, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, I'm so sorry. Or RGS Pro, or, Green Zenith I tried to get in because he had some interest. I tried to get Ruben Morty in because he had some interest. I tried to get Jordak in as well. Out of those, really only Nathan and myself made any videos around it before the server had technical issues and went down. But I would argue that what we had was fairly successful, albeit it was short-lived. It did work, and people seemed to enjoy it.
Okay, so long-form content, as well as almost interactive, something to engage with.
Yeah.
Right, you're saying don't have content that just spits out at you. You want content that brings you along or makes you interested in it.
Yeah, something that kind of brings you along for the ride a little bit.
Okay.
A longer-term series, I think, would do fairly well if it had some unique elements to it.
Sure. Now, what have you seen for interacting with the community? So you've already reached out to different prominent members. What have you learned about that process? Is there some do's and don'ts you can share?
People are generally busy. This is one thing that I think anyone who tries to get the attention of a major community member will see. Oftentimes, people who make the most stuff are constantly busy with a never-ending list. I guess be patient with people would probably be my first thing. And if you're trying to do any sort of a collaboration, it's probably best to establish yourself a little bit first. Show that you are putting in the effort to make good content. There's a lot of people who maybe are first starting out. They want to collab with all of their favorite people. And it just kind of becomes a bit awkward when you have someone, especially someone who's younger, who wants to do something with, an adult who's been at this for, half a decade now.
Sure.
It's not to say that you shouldn't start out early. I think that doing YouTubing has been one of the most rewarding things I've done as far as learning goes. It's helped me to be a lot more outspoken. It's helped me to learn a lot of technical skills and to be more creative. But I would not want to collaborate with teenage me starting out on YouTube. It would be a bit awkward, I suppose is the best way to put it. But absolutely, I think that people should get into it. People should experiment and should continue to try to improve what they make.
That's some great advice. From my experience with each community member so far, yourself included, I guess my advice on that subject would be reach out to them however you want that first time. Very likely, if they know you, they'll respond. If they don't know you, a lot of them will respond kindly. What you'll find is each member has a very distinct personality. I would say that Jordoc has a completely different personality as Benrob, has a completely different personality as myself, and you'll see that across the community. And expect that. In fact, if you are just starting out, say you just came into this community, it's been like a week and you are excited about starting your own YouTube series, and you are that teenager who wants to make your own content. Don't be discouraged. Benrob is correct that you will have a hard time finding a lot of the older members to interact with you, but there will be some that play ball. I would probably be one of those. But there are others in this community that would be very gladly help you. All we really want to see is excitement, enthusiasm, and progress. So if you're putting out the effort to make something, and we consider quality probably a lot higher than you do, something quality in our eyes is oftentimes, I hate to speak for everybody, is oftentimes something that took you multiple weeks to put together. Think about, thought about, got feedback, put out in the wild, tested it, refixed it, whether that be code, whether that be an idea, whether that be an asset. If you want to get talking about art assets, I'm probably not your guy. Go talk to Hughes Ross. But there is always a place for starting out in the Minetest community. As far as other communities I've interacted with, it's relatively very easy to get into and to meet everyone. Would you have anything to add to that, Benrob?
Honestly, the Minetest community has been great for people starting out from what I've seen from my own personal experience and other things. One of the biggest things, especially from a modder's perspective, is to put in some effort yourself. I see a lot of people who maybe don't come from sort of a self-learning perspective, and they want to be taught, and we don't have teachers here very much. There are definitely some teachers who have taken an interest, but oftentimes people want to see that you are willing to put in the effort yourself to make what you want to make, and then they'll help you along the way. So just being able to go and use a search engine, I suppose, is one of the biggest things. You know, if you've done some of your own research, you're like, I can't find it, people will point you in the right direction. But if, you're just asking idly because you don't want to put in the effort, people aren't going to take as kindly to that.
Yeah, it's directly correlated. How much effort you put in is how much effort we put at you.
Mm-hmm.
If you say you've put in 8 hours of effort and it shows that you have at least put in at least 10 minutes of effort, we will respect that.
Yes.
What advice do you have to someone who has never coded before and wants to make something in Minetest?
Probably my biggest piece of advice would be to look up a basic Lua tutorial. There's loads of them on the internet, and it'll help you get the basics down of what's going on. And from there, it'll be a lot easier to understand what the API docs are saying, what the reference manual or the PIL, Programming in Lua book, is saying. Just you'll be able to follow along a lot easier and pick up on things if you understand at least some of the basics of how to program in Lua.
Good advice. Solid advice. And to those listeners that are afraid of getting into programming, one, that's a fair assessment. It's not always easy. It is easy as you start out, but it gets harder quickly. And the other thing I would say about it is, if you are the kind of person who says, I am never going to be a programmer, you absolutely still have a spot in this community. There is a lot of art, story, build, assets, like even on servers, there's a massive need for just players. We enjoy contributions like that almost more than we enjoy another mod. The end goal of all of us is almost always to grow the community slightly and to share our creativity. So if you want to contribute, don't think it has to always be in the form of a mod or in the form of a piece of art. Even just being active is a wonderful thing. It breathes life into the community, especially if you're new.
Yeah. It took me a number of years before I actually made any mods myself. I was strictly a player and someone who interacted with the community mainly on the forums for a long time. And later on, IRC, and then more recently, Discord. Being active and contributing your time to actually appreciating the things that people have made does speak a lot to them.
Very true.
Further, one of the most useful things that people can do, even if you never plan on touching an ounce of code, is being able to report bugs well. Giving useful information that can help us developers figure out, what is going on and where the bug might be and how to reproduce it is all extraordinarily helpful. And you don't have to understand the code at all to do that.
Yeah, even just an error box screenshotted from the Minetest crash is always helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that advice. That's helpful. Do you have any closing thoughts about kind of things you'd want to share with listeners from yourself, thinking back on your own membership in this community?
Have fun. Try different things. There's a lot of different things that are out there. Try to avoid badly made mod soups. And try out different games. There have been a lot of different ones over the years that have kind of just died in obscurity. And I think it's kind of a shame.
Toss out some names for our listeners.
I've already mentioned Nodecore. There's a few other ones in development. I have my own, obviously, the Infinite IKEA. There's also Watergame. There is Exile is getting some more development oomph nowadays. Really just looking through the games listing on ContentDB is probably one of the best things you can do and test them out. There's one, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a remake of an older game where you would push boxes around in a 3D puzzle, and that was actually really well made.
Yeah, I think it's called Box 3D. Don't hold me to it.
I think that is correct.
Okay, cool. That's some solid advice. Definitely get out there. Don't get stuck in the Minecloud or Minetest mod soup world. There is more out there for you.
There is. Not to say that MTG mods or Mineclone are bad. Quite the contrary, there's been a lot of work put into both of those. But there is also more, and I think it would do the community a lot of good to have more people who check those out.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, I think that closes us up for the day. For all those listeners, give us some feedback, especially me, on whatever platforms I end up putting this on what you thought, what I should have asked more of, what you'd like to hear more from Benrob. Feel free to reach out to him through his normal channels. He's just about everywhere nowadays in the Minetest community, IRC, Discord, you name it. And also make sure to play Infinite IKEA. It is a fun game. All right. Thank you, Benrob. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.